So good morning. My name's Diana Belfon and I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Specialist for Integrated Care Northamptonshire. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you this morning to our Leadership Matters conversation, Women in Leadership. And our keynote speaker for today is Sam Allen. Next slide, please. So now the session has started, I would just like to run through a few housekeeping with you. So if we can just move to the next slide, we'd like to assure you that this session will be managed in the best way that we can do. And we've got two key facilitators today, myself and Mohammed Zikar from Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland ICB. Now, Mohammed is an experienced communicator, and so we are in good hands. So the housekeeping rules, just to run through them quite quickly with you, is we'd like to encourage you to keep your cameras on. It's always good for the speakers to see those wonderful smiling faces out there. So please do keep your cameras on. The session will be recorded today so that our colleagues who aren't able to join us today can watch on demand. Now, this is an interactive session, so your questions will be welcomed. You can use the raise hand function within Teams, or alternatively, you can put your question in the chat box and Mohammed and myself will be looking for your questions so that we can share with Sam. You will note that your microphones have all been muted, and the reason for that is that we will be recording the session today, so we would like to eliminate any background noises. And colleagues who are hard of hearing, just like myself, you can use this transcript button at the top of your screens. There's three little dots. You can click on that so that you can activate the transcript. And finally, we would just like to remind everybody to be professional, courteous and respectful during this session and adhere to the housekeeping rules. I would now like to introduce you to the chairperson for today's session, Angela Hillary, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust and Leicestershire Partnership Trust. So over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Diana and Mohammed, and welcome everybody to this fantastic session. Welcome colleagues from Northamptonshire and Leicestershire. It's great to have a joint session and I know it will be a good one. But it gives me great pleasure to be here today to introduce you and to welcome Sam Allen. Sam is the Chief Executive of the Integrated Care Board in North East and North Cumbria, which she's been in post since January 2022. And prior to that, Sam was a chief executive like myself in a provider organisation, Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. And that was a role that she commenced back in 2017. So for those of you who haven't come across Sam before, and I'm sure many of you have, she started working in the NHS in about 1996. And has a background in operational management and leadership of mental health services, as well as health and social care commissioning. And I think it's really important to say, as well as the role that I've already mentioned, she has a number of different roles. And of course, one of those, which is really important, and I'm sure will come up today, is the chair of the NHS Confederations Health and Care Women's Leadership Network, a really important role. And as a woman leader in the NHS, I'm really pleased to say that Sam has been a very valued colleague of mine, and she is one that totally inspires me every single day. So thank you very much for being here, Sam. I know the diary's busy, but for you spending some time with us and juggling your diary to be with us, we really appreciate it. Thank you, and over to you.
Oh, thank you, Angela, and also huge thank you to Diana and Mohammed as well for all of their support and hand-holding to get here today. And it is really wonderful to see so many fantastic people, names, people I know, I've heard of, I look up to, joining us on the call today. I think it's really important that we all believe in the sort of the all teach, all learn. And actually, we're at our best when we are working together, when we are able to share and support one another, and also when we're able to challenge each other. So just to reiterate Diana's point today, that today's an opportunity for all of us, and really great to get your comments, your feedback, your challenge, your questions, but also your offers of support in the chat box too for each other. I think it would be fair to say, Angela, I've been a huge admirer of yours, as you know, for many years, and I think when we work in health and care services, not only is it the most amazing privilege, and it's, in my mind, the best job in the world, these can be tough jobs as well. They can be really challenging jobs, both emotionally and physically, and therefore that opportunity to form real supportive networks and that diversity of thought are certainly things that have carried me through some of the most rewarding times, but also some of the most challenging times. So huge credit to the integrated care system for bringing these opportunities together, and what I just see as sort of big learning opportunities, really. Just to say, I've got a slight delay my end on seeing some of my slides. I don't know whether we could move on, but I've got a bit of a backup here if I need to look across at them. And also I've asked Anna, because once I get going, sometimes I can keep going. So I've asked Anna also to help me with timekeeping today as well, so that we leave good opportunity for discussion and Q&A before the hour is up. So if you can see the slide, my first slide, which looks like a series of wheels and cogs, I just wanted to pop this one up, really. So recognising that I can imagine many of you work in and with the ICS. Some of you might work in health and care roles in statutory organisations, and I'm sure some of you work in fabulous third sector, voluntary sector organisations. Some of you may also be working in the private sector. And I think sometimes when we talk about health and care systems, we talk about them sometimes in very evangelical ways, when we actually believe, and our starting point is, that these systems are perfectly formed, everything is joined up, when actually the reality and the practice is something quite different. And sometimes it can be as stark as what you can see on the left, silos, people working separately, not connected, and sometimes it's something in between the left and the right. And I think systems are also subject to continuous improvement, and there is no such thing anywhere in the world as the perfect health and care system. We're all striving to do the best we can for our population, and I thought your strategy, your integrated care strategy vision of helping people to live their best life, was really, really inspiring. And if we're going to do that, we absolutely need systems, and therefore leadership within systems that enable systems to work together. And what Mintzberg, and those of you who have done any management training in theory or reading up will know Mintzberg is well published. What Mintzberg says sometimes is in healthcare, we're not failing, but sometimes we're succeeding expensively. And I thought, I was really curious about that, particularly at a time when resources are so constrained. And one of the reasons why he talks about this, he talks about the myth, is he believes that actually systems need to be led from the ground up, and they need to be collaborative. They're not something that putting a structure in or designing a governance approach is really going to cut it. That actually we need our systems to be led by the people who live in them and who work in them. And they've got to be led from the ground up, not the top down. From a system perspective also, we need leaders that don't just believe that being more business-like and running systems and organisations more effectively as a business is going to cut it anymore. And in fact, I think if some of the really tragic reported events of recent times, and most recently things such as the outcome of the Letby trial tells us, is actually, again, we're really missing the point as leaders if we don't have that human touch and that compassionate approach within our organisations. If we don't understand what it is like to be both on the receiving end of services, but also work in delivering services. If you have leaders and managers that are detached from that reality, then we're not going to be getting the best outcomes for people who work in our systems. So it's a really slightly long-winded way of saying that when it comes to systems and healthcare systems, leaders that work in them need to be in touch with those that they're in service to, and that everybody has a part to play right across our communities. So when we think about this conversation as women in leadership, thinking what is it that women bring into health and care leadership that makes the outcomes better for the people we serve, and really to enable the people in the Northamptonshire system to live their best life. So what I want to do, if we could just move on to the next slide, please, is just say a little bit about the Health and Care Network that I've got the real amazing privilege to chair. And Tracy Jolliffe, who's the Head of Inclusive Leadership Development at NHS England, co-chairs. We've got over 2,500 members at the moment. It's just to say that this is a very inclusive network. This is for anybody working in and with health and care. You don't have to work in the NHS. You don't have to work in local government. You could work in the independent sector. You could be running your own business. But if you work in health and care and you've got an interest in women in leadership, please join. And this is for both aspiring women leaders and also senior women leaders. And also we're very inclusive. So we do welcome and embrace all members who identify as a woman into our network. We also collaborate with a number of sister networks of the Confed. So there's the LGBTQ plus network and also the BMA Leadership Network. And we also support and work with a number of sister networks across the NHS. You may have heard of some of these, and many of us are multiple members of these networks as well. But there's the Shuri Network, which is all about advancing BME women in the digital and tech sector, the NHS Muslim Women's Network, and there are lots of medical women networks that we work with. But as a network, we've done quite a bit of work, and I'll say a bit about that shortly, but we've really come to realise that actually our influence is greatest driving change through the women that work in services. So we set up a network of women's networks. We now support over 50 women's networks right across predominantly the NHS, but other organisations, supporting women to lead change in their places of work and in their communities. And I think when we, and I'll come on to talk about when you put intent into action, it's one thing to have a view about something and it's one thing to have an opinion, but actually leadership, we really like to see is about doing things and delivering change for other people. And I think we've got many decades and centuries of people and activists that have led change for others to drive equity and equality across our societies. So actually, we can have lots of views about things, we can produce lots of evidence and reports, but actually it's the doing, it's the single actions we take every single day that will make a difference for those people we work alongside, those people we're in service to in our communities, and also those people that will follow in our footsteps. We could move on, please. So some of our priorities across the network, so just with the things we're focused on, definitely advancing women's health And I'm sure many of you are busy thinking about how to implement and getting on and implementing the women's health strategy. And we're supporting Dame Leslie Regan with that. Now, again, we have a sort of fundamental belief that given the scale of the workforce and that women are so prevalent in the health and caring workforce, that actually if we don't look after ourselves and our health, we're not going to be able to care for others. So this is a huge priority for us and for our communities. Women's safety. Now, again, recent events sadly have told us that we have got a lot of work to do here, not only across all institutions, across the public sector, but in society as a whole. How do we create safe places for women and young girls as well? What are we role modelling? What are we teaching? And the standards that we're setting across society, and what are we tolerating within the workplace that we absolutely need to see an end to. So the Women's Safety Charter that was published just a couple of weeks ago, we're absolutely on a mission to ensure that every health and care organisation is signed up to that. And I'm really proud that in the North East, North Cumbria, I think we're the first system out of the 42 in England where we have got every single one of our NHS organisations signed up and committed to that charter. And my call to action is in Northamptonshire and Leicestershire, can you do the same? And do it in the next week. But of course, signing up to a charter is one thing. Doing the hard work needed to have zero tolerance, to make sure that our workplaces and the work that we're doing with our communities enables safety for all is just critical. And there is something called Project S that Kate Jarman from Milton Keynes, one of our members of our network, is leading across the NHS. There's lots of ways to get involved in that. But again, it's the local action that will make a difference. And you'll know what the issues are, and people in your communities and in your organisations will know what the issues are. So we need to do a lot more listening and acting. Absolutely the gender pay gap. And again, I'm going to tell you why that's not gone away and the work we've got to do there. How we get more women into senior positions, making sure that we do have gender equality in our most senior positions, absolutely critical, particularly in terms of shaping decision making. And we know actually when you look at the economic environment and of course systems, we've got a job to do now, looking at job creation, supporting our population to have meaningful occupations. What better occupation than coming to work in health and care? And having looked at your ICS, Senior Health and Care Academy, absolutely brilliant. We'll be shamelessly stealing that up in the North East, North Cumbria. But actually, there's more women now in employment than men. It's just that we usually hold some of the lower paid jobs and also some of the jobs working less full time. So actually, what does the economy look like from a woman's perspective in terms of those opportunities that are there for them? And also, how do we sustain people in employment into later years, which is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to have sustainable health and care services. And then, of course, how we support professional development. Look, we do loads of stuff, providing space and opportunities like you're doing today for people to come together, learn from each other. So if you're not a member, you can sign up and there'll be details on the final slide. So why is it important? Why is it really important to have women in leadership roles? So I'm not sure if you can see the slide with three numbers on. And you probably look at those numbers and think, well, what are they? What are those numbers? So 2151, 2153, 2290. And these are years, right? These are years. Bear in mind, we're in 2023 at the moment. And if I was to, and this is a massive assumption, so I was thinking about this morning, thinking what would be the average age of everybody on this call today? And I was really hopeful and optimistic because I stopped celebrating my birthday at 30, so I could be forever 30 and think, oh, should we go with an average age of 30? No, I went with the average age of 40. And I thought, yeah, let's be kind. So if you think about the average age of 40, right, and you think about what is the average life expectancy of a woman now in England. Now, the really sad thing, you'll know this through the population health work you do, is that depending on where you live, you know, it can have a massive impact, can't it, on your average life expectancy, but also your quality of life. But actually the average age in England at the moment for a woman living is just under 86 years. So if I took the average age of 40 on this call today, and this is really awful because we're not very good in our society and our culture in England of talking about death. But if you think then that on average, quite a lot of ours will be gone by 2063. So this is going to put these years in perspective, right? 2151, at the rate we're making progress at the moment, is the year that it's predicted that England will have addressed the gender pay gap, right? 2151. Okay, so most of ours will have been gone for nearly a century, right? When we achieve that at the rate we're going at today. And we do know also that in COVID, it set us back a little bit in this area. In terms of 2153 at the rate we're making progress across the world at the moment is the year it's predicted we'll have gender equality in the most senior political decision-making positions across the world, 2153. And 2290 will be the year we will have achieved gender equality and addressed things like the pay gap across the world. 2290. So if anyone thinks the work isn't done, you've only got to look at the evidence and the statistics and look at how we're making progress and the work we're doing that tells us that's just simply not the case. So look, everyone on this call, yeah, whatever your gender, we've got a lot of work to do, okay? And we can make a difference. There are things we can do every single day in our practices for others that make a difference. And do you know what? I love this quote. The next big thing isn't going to be a big thing. It's going to be a series of small things. So small actions kind of can lead to change. The next lot of figures on the next slide, right? So the 51%, what's the 51%? We are 51% of the population in the country. Women are 51% of the population. What's the 59%? Well, we represent 59% of the unpaid carers in the country. 78% is we represent 78% of the NHS workforce, and the 82% is we represent 82% of the social care workforce. So women really matter. What we do really matters, and we are caring, doing a lot of the caring for the nation, both paid caring and unpaid caring. And in fact, when we surveyed women during COVID, the numbers of hours we were working on average unpaid doing caring responsibilities increased quite substantially. So is it any wonder people are still tired and feeling the impact of the pandemic and everything we all collectively went through during that? So what have we been doing as a network? Well, we've been producing lots of reports. Action for Equality, The Time Is Now, was probably our most seminal report back in 2020. And we did make some recommendations on that. And the really good thing is, with the recent work around things like setting equality objectives for all board members and organisations, that was guidance that came out a few weeks ago from NHS England. That was one of our recommendations in 2020. But that report also really placed a lot of emphasis on the importance of intersectionality and race, because of course when we talk about women, sometimes we talk about women as though it's a homogenous group, and the reality is, just like our population, when we are advancing equality for all women and when we're thinking about equity, we have to think a bit differently, because again, what the evidence tells us, even if you just take something like the gender pay gap, actually if you're a woman of colour from an ethnic minoritized community, you won't just be paid less because you're a woman, you'll also be paid less because of your race. So and there are lots of aspects of intersectionality. So our report really focused on that. We also focused a lot, as I said already, on looking and building evidence of the women during COVID. One of the really start things that really challenged some of my assumptions and biases when we all rushed to keep people safe from the virus and where we could protect them by keeping them at home, it was that dawning reality when we started surveying women that home was not a safe place for everybody. You know, and I remember as a very senior leader and decision maker at that particular time, it just, even as a woman, it hadn't even crossed my thinking at that stage. We were preoccupied with the virus, but we hadn't thought about the other impacts on women and families in terms of those types, the lockdown. And I think we are really seeing that come through now, both whether it's around mental health needs in our communities, but actually, were we really thinking about those things? And actually, where do we around the decision-making table challenge some of our biases and assumptions? So intersectionality, hugely important. So if we just move on, please, what sort of building on this? What are the importance really of women in leadership roles? Well, we know there's a lot of evidence that it does lead to better decision making. Not can, it does. And actually, if you take an example outside of healthcare, when you looked at the large financial crash back in sort of the 2009 period, and you looked at the gender diversity on some of those FTSE 100 companies and banking organisations, one of the things they all agreed was actually they needed more gender equality around the board table. If they'd have had more women around the board table, when it came to making decisions from a risk perspective, they would have made some different decisions. And that's been borne out by research. Also, the UN, the one organisation that set a really clear goal to achieve gender equality in their director roles. So they do now have 50-50. The gender equality definition we usually go on is anywhere between 60-40 split on a board, but the UN, all of their director roles, they've achieved gender equality. And lo and behold, what was one of the things they found? One of the things they found, particularly in some of the war zones they were working in, was that their women were better negotiators. They were better negotiators. If we look at global leadership, if you look at when Scotland, Iceland and New Zealand were had female political leaders leading the countries, if you look at some of the collaboration they were doing across their countries around well-being and the well-being of their populations, really inspiring. So this natural style and affiliative style to collaboration is something that's recognised that women do bring into those settings. And therefore, if you've got that, you've got the potential to improve outcomes, build trust. How do you really manage and spot that talent in organisations and driving that equality of opportunity? So there's lots of research now that's telling us the importance of gender equality. It's not just a nice to have. It's seen now more as an essential. But why is it that we aren't seeing women taking up all of these positions? And if you look across NHS boards, and the last bit of research we did was back in 2020. We had actually made progress between 2017 and 2020, where actually in 2020 we'd closed the gap by about 500 roles, looking at executive and non-executive roles, but probably the two roles we'd made less progress in were in the finance director role and the medical director role. So actually understanding what is it about women in terms of why they're not taking up these roles. We did a bit of in-depth research, and one of the things we found through that was sometimes people's image of what it takes to do those roles they felt was unrealistic or unachievable. So the sense that you had to, work became more consuming. It was unmanageable within the hours, and particularly people who had caring responsibilities, could they do that? How many times do you see a very senior position advertised as a job share? Not that many. We are seeing a small number of examples of that at the moment, and I think Macmillan Cancer role model that really well, where their medical director role is a job share between a GP and an oncologist. Now, actually they're getting the best of both worlds there, because they're getting two different views, and they've got a job share. And actually, would those people undertaking those roles been able to have taken up a full-time role? Possibly not. So actually, the design of roles, how we conceive the workplace, these are sometimes seen as quite big barriers for women taking on these roles. I think also, having spoken to many, many women now, and also personally having imposter syndrome at various points in my career, what I would call sometimes our own self-limiting beliefs, what's in our heads, really thinking about the one thing you don't feel you tick the box on, or you haven't got that particular qualification, or that bit of the personal experience specification that you don't have. So there's something about us really recognizing that, and also supporting each other through that. It hasn't made it onto my slides yet. And I remember when the film was coming out, I said, actually, I don't really feel like I want to go and see Barbie. But a girlfriend said to me, no, you must, Sam, you must go and see Barbie. I don't know whether you can have a virtual show of hands who's seen Barbie. But actually, I thought it was fantastic, because it was that whole world we live in almost being deconstructed. And I even found that, absolutely fascinating. I see we've got a few hands up. I'm going to keep going, if that's right, Diana, till the end, and I won't be much longer, and then we'll just pause. So allyship was something else I wanted to talk about. If we could just move on, please. And one of the things we did as a network is, again, recognising the research, right? This is a statement of fact. If the men are more engaged in the equality, diversity and inclusion work in organisations, it makes quicker progress, right? You're going to get results much quicker. So I'm a great believer in the saying, it's not the women that need the fixing, it's the system. But actually, if we're going to really do it, we need to engage everybody. So recognising men as allies. And I have had, and I continue to have, amazing allyship. There's two people I would really call out for that as men who've been, in fact, three. Jagtar Singh, he was the first man I met at one of our women's networks meetings. He brought his wife, and he gave me such encouragement to kind of really go for it. And I will always be grateful for that. And he's a massive supporter. The other person is Rob Webster. Quite often, and he does this consciously. Rob, in meetings, when you've said something and then somebody else picks it up and reframes it slightly, Rob will always be the person who will kind of acknowledge the contribution that I've made. And then just finally, my current chair, actually, Sir Liam Donaldson, hugely generous with his wisdom, his time, and also somebody who really engages in conversations from different perspectives. And I think, as a woman, having a really safe place where you can explore different perspectives, again, we mustn't underestimate the allyship that men and our colleagues can give us. But of course, it's not enough just to talk about men as allies. It's about the doing. And the real definition I love of a man as an ally is a man who will advocate for women when there are no women in the room. Now, we'll never know if that's actually happening, but that's, as a man, we want to see. And when we did our report looking at men as allies, one of the things we really learned through listening to men, is that they're really conscious sometimes of getting things wrong. And in that sort of consciousness of not wanting to get it wrong, sometimes don't engage in the conversation. So our big message there was, we really need men to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable. As women and sisters, we need to recognise that we shouldn't have to do this all for ourselves, and they need to recognise that as well. And we also need men to really think about not recruiting in their own image, not fostering long hours, cultures and presenteeism, and also willing to engage in the evidence. And like I say, how brilliant, we've got lots that are doing that. But I think if there are any men on this call or listening to this, the learning starts with a conversation, and it starts with listening. And one of the things I really learned particularly as a sponsor of an LGBTQ plus network, was sometimes being an ally wasn't about what I thought I was doing to offer allyship. It was the allyship people needed. And I recognised that actually on that journey for me of learning, I need to do a lot more listening, engaging and listening. But also I would say as women leaders, let's really support our colleagues to engage in this conversation as well. And also from that intersectional perspective. If we could just go on, just quickly, and I've covered the next slide, so if we could go on to the one with the quote, please. As women, and this is a quote from Angela Davis, who you'll know is a scholar, an educator, and very big in the civil rights movement in the US. And I mean, there are lots of quotes here, but we must always attempt to lift as we climb. When we occupy any role we occupy in the service, right, is a privilege. And I remember the first day I started, my first job in the service was as a receptionist, okay? But I had that job, okay? I'd got my foot in the door. Every single one of us, whatever our role, we've got our foot in the door. You know, there are youngsters coming through who are trying to find their way, their step into the workplace. There is also the most amazing talent and potential that sits untapped right across our workplace. Seek it out, find it, and support others. That is our job as leaders. I think we cannot begin to think about ourselves as leaders if we are not supporting other people to lead. And that also means sponsoring people, giving people the opportunity to come into spaces and giving them that exposure to work. So I just wanted to finish just on three quick things, okay? My sort of three quick messages, if we could move on to the next slide. Firstly, know what your leadership stands for, okay? Really easy question to ask, but much harder to really think about, what is my leadership and service for? And for me, it's absolutely in service to our communities. That is the number one thing. That is my role: leadership and service to our communities and our population. But know what your leadership stands for, and then think about how that connects with your intent, your actions, what you spend your time doing, and the difference that you're striving to make. Secondly, the growth mindset. You know, Angela and I are on this call. I see Heidi's on the call as well. Please do not think that those of us who have the title of Chief Executives are the finished article. We are not. In fact, we're far from it. Every single day we're learning, and actually having that growth mindset, that ability to pick yourself up again, to be curious, to seek out learning and views. And as I say, doing lots of listening, really, really critical. Have that growth mindset. And then just finally, I would ask ourselves the question, can you walk a mile in someone else's shoes? If so, who would you choose and what would you learn? But most importantly, what would it do to inform your leadership? So whose shoes would you pick to go and walk a mile in? What would you want to be learned? What would you be curious about? And then how would you use that to drive your leadership, the actions that you take in the workplace, the things you want to change? So look, on the final slide, and we'll get these out with the presentation, there's details on how to join the network. If you're not a member, we'd really welcome you into our community. As I said, you've seen our priorities, what we are intent on changing. But just to finish where I started, which is as an integrated care system, I really believe, having worked in health and care services now for over 25 years, this is an amazing opportunity to do better for our population, our community. And in doing so, we have to do that together. Whether you work in the ICB, a community and voluntary sector organisation, an NHS trust, in the local authority, you know, your focus to help people live the best lives means that we all have to come together, and doing so, that we need to challenge some of the way we think. So look, it's been wonderful to be here with you today. Really looking forward to the conversation we're going to get into now, and also your thoughts. Did it provoke anything I say provoking anything in you? What did you take from it? I'm really excited to listen to you and answer some of your questions now. So Diana and Mohammed, I think you're going to facilitate this bit.
Sam, thank you so much for that inspirational discussion. It's such an opportunity for us now to ask you some questions. So what I'd like to do is open this up to our wide audience, and what questions you'd like to ask Sam. You've got lots of hearts, Sam. You've got lots of hearts. You've got lots of... There's someone with their hand up, but I can't see who it is on my screen. It's Raina?
Hi, Diane, it's Rena.
Rena. Good morning, Rena.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Apologies, I joined late, so I didn't join till about 11 o'clock, so I've missed the first half, but the last half that I did enjoy, thoroughly enjoyed, that I did join. A couple of questions for me. So I've seen you touched on the point about imposter syndrome. That's something that I suffer from really badly. What I would welcome advice on is how do you deal with that? How's best to manage that? So imposter syndrome is something that I do suffer with quite badly. And then you touched upon, when we apply for jobs as women, we always feel as if we don't meet enough of the requirements, so it stops us from applying. Well, again, how do you build your confidence then to actually say, well, actually, no, I meet 60% or 70%. And do you know what? I'm going to take that deep dive, because the amount of times I've applied for a job and then I go back, amend, go back, amend. And when it comes to submit, I think, oh, never mind, we weren't meant to be. And it's myself who's put myself off. And the other thing that I've noticed about my career is, because I brought up my kids first before I focused on my career. My kids are all now grown up, postgraduate, etc. And now I'm back to focusing on me as Rena. One thing I've noticed in the last 10 years of my progression is that, and it's really sad to say this, but women are women's worst enemies. Like you touched on it earlier, I've worked for some amazing male managers. One of the best for me was somebody called Ian Roddis. But I do find it, in this day and age, we still are one another's worst enemy,
Yeah, thanks, Renus. Yeah, look, I'm sure everything you've just said there resonates with so many people. I think the imposter syndrome, and it's interesting that you use the word sort of suffer from it. And I would have said that a few years ago, I really suffer from this. It's really bad. And of course, I mean, just those who are interested, the imposter syndrome was invented by somebody called Nancy Clancy, and you can actually do something called the Clancy scale, where you can see on a rating up to 100 actually how bad it is. And what I know when I've got it is sometimes it's dialed up really high, and sometimes it's kind of just quietly there in the background. And I've actually tried to turn it into a super strength, right? Because I think that for me, one of the strengths is the bit of humility that comes with it. Could you imagine not really being a person that has self-doubts and, I mean, amazing, like super uber confident, but actually I think there's a sort of a humility to it as well. However, I think when it's really loud, that's the time when it's a bit like, I've got a bad neck or something and I need to get me massage gun out. I need to go and do something. And quite often it's a chat with a girlfriend, it's a chat with a trusted source, why am I feeling like this? Or it's a good talk to myself and some positive affirmations, So I think it can be quite debilitating if it's really, really noisy. And I think if it's really noisy, mentorship, a conversation, exploring, trying to get underneath why, and the 5 whys. Why am I feeling like this? Well, and why would that be? And then some really proactive coping strategies, and you will know what works for you. But there's always somebody to talk to. And, you know, Angela would be somebody maybe I could ring up and say, do you know what, Angela, I'm really feeling like this. And we've had a couple of these conversations, haven't we, Angela, around
We have.
we'll find ourselves in
Yeah.
meetings with very eminent people, and actually, should we have a go at speaking first in the meeting, stuff like that. I think on the job front, again, I think good mentorship. I've always found when I'm applying for a job or thinking about it, talking it through with somebody. Do not give up at the first hurdle. That's my number one message. Do not be the person again that says, oh, I can't do bullet point 39 in a job description. I mean, look, whoever reads a job description once you've got the job. No, I mean, really, you know, because jobs are what you make them and you grow into them. So if you can do, you know, a good chunk of that job, everybody has got development to make. There'll be no one person that can tick every single box. And, you know, Rena, it's really good to hear that you've got that time back for you. And I would say setting some clear goals, and putting a plan into action, because this stuff doesn't just happen because we think about it. We put it on I'm focused on this tomorrow, I'm going to worry about myself, you know, next week, because you'll never get round to it. So having some really clear goals, whether it's through your appraisal or your personal development plan, really, really key. Angela, was there anything you would add to that?
No, and I think the important thing is to not assume that we don't have it. We all have it, I think. And I like the dial approach, because different days it's different elements. But yeah, my strategy is always to reach for those people I know that I can trust, who really help me. And that's never gone away through the whole career. So that really works for me. But you've got to find what works for you. You really have. And but don't doubt that we all have it. Everyone, I think it's just whether we admit to it.
Yeah,
Lovely.
absolutely.
Thank you for that response. Can I invite Kirsty Watson?
Thank you. Would it be possible to take the QA screen down, because it would be nice to see more of people's faces? Would that be acceptable? I was coming back to each of Rena's points, actually, because I have suffered with imposter syndrome, and having talked with my other half about it, who's 22 years ex-military and has been in some really intimidating situations. And actually, it became clear that he's experienced it in exactly the same way. And his view is that you feel the fear and do it anyway. And that kind of engenders quite a healthy response, that you accept that, yeah, it feels a bit hard, so you get on with it and do it anyway. I was thinking about the applying for posts. I used to not apply for posts until I watched someone far less capable than me get a job because he was the strongest candidate, because all of the good women didn't apply. And from there on in, I took the view that you can't win unless you've got a ticket, unless you've had a go. I trust our interviewers to ensure that we have the best candidate. And if that best candidate's me, then brilliant. If it's not, then for the system, we get the right person. And I get somebody that I can learn from. So I've gone in with that approach ever since. And that feels much healthier, that I've actually found each of those interview opportunities and experiences a learning experience. I always come out feeling more capable after an interview, because it forces you to focus on the positives of what things you do well, as opposed to all the gaps that we tend to focus on ourselves. So I think taking all of those step up opportunities as a chance to practice your skills, learn about yourself and focus on your positives is really healthy. And for me, I think thinking about women are women's worst enemies. I've been in IT a long time. I've worked really, really hard, lots of silly hours, at times to the detriment of my family. I don't want to engender those things for those people coming after me. Rather than thinking about, it was hard for me, you've got to go through hard things, I would much rather be looking at, what can we do that's flexible working? Do jobs need to be whole times? Can we make use of work from home? All of those things that are now available to us that weren't available 30 plus years ago when I started my career, rather than, and that's for males and females. But actually, I think sometimes women don't want to think about those things because they fear that it engenders weakness. But actually, family friendly working, that means that we get the best out of our staff when we've got them, is surely better than pulling people to the point where we're burning candles at both ends in order to keep up with a level that's not balanced. Isn't healthy. So I think we've got real opportunities being in these positions now to be thinking about, as we recruit, as we work with our teams, the way that we offer opportunities to flex and provide better balance for all of our workforce. Fingers crossed, hopefully in the future.
That's really positive. Thanks for sharing that, Kirsty, and also kind of what drove you to make that change as well, and how you found that, and you know, the leadership that you're showing around creating those cultures and environments that support all. I think that's really positive. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Kirsty. Can I invite Asha Day for her question, please?
Thanks, Diana and Sam. Morning. Sam, I'm just interested about the imposter syndrome. I think I'll put in the chat that there are lots of layers to this that add to the imposter syndrome. And I take it from a woman of an Asian background. And I remember having an appraisal system, the appraisal system, where your line manager says, well, actually, I think you're at this in terms of outcomes and what you do. And you said, well, actually, I think I'm at this. And whilst you don't want to create conflict and you say, OK, I'll accept it, but a lot of people I would recommend actually challenge that. If you've done regional, national stuff, if you've done things that are creating patient care and you're mitigating safety, that's something. So don't let the system or the process say, actually, it's only, and don't say, I'm only it's only, because I think that just adds to your imposter syndrome. But also, I have had this, and people think, oh gosh, Ashley, she's quite eloquent, she's quite confident, she's okay. But I quake in my boots at times, and you know, it's cost me a job. I applied for a job and I didn't get it. And when the interview and the outcome came, so why didn't you come and talk to us? And well, you've got a conflict of interest, etc., etc. I'm doing somebody's thinking for them. Don't do their thinking. Don't make assumptions. But that outcome from that interview panel was actually, you are good enough. And if you'd have done A, B, and C, that's why it stopped you. And that is my culture saying to me, you don't disagree with people in authority, you don't disagree with people who are more senior to you. We need to let that go.
Yeah, absolutely, Asha, and actually, you know, we need to better understand that as well, and that sort of the sort of the cultural elements in the workplace, and the diversity, and what sometimes will shape responses or behaviours. As a really good example, I recently was put in one of our bulletins in the ICB the opportunity to attend a programme, and actually, when I looked at the people who put themselves forward, it wasn't a particularly diverse group of people. And then actually going out to explore that a little bit more was a sense that some people actually, even just seeing the opportunity, even though it was open to everybody, hadn't actually interpreted it as it was open to them. It's actually an opportunity open to them. So I think the more we can understand this in the workplace, understand each other, and have that cultural awareness to help shape our behaviours and to have more equitable work environments, the better, really. And I think if we're all being really honest, we've got a lot of work to do on that. And of course, in the way you did, it sometimes starts with being able to have a conversation in a trusting environment, because sometimes when we do these things, it's a bit like the men as allies. There will be things that won't go well or will get wrong, but people not being fearful of that, but actually how do we grow and learn together and understand that sometimes we won't always get this right.
Thank you for that response, Sam. There was a question submitted earlier, and I'd like to ask that question on behalf of the person. And we've got great leaders who are women on this call today. Sam, we've got you, we've got Angela, we've got Alice, we've got Heidi. Great leaders here between the two trusts. However, The question is this, and this is probably a question that all of you have probably been asked. Have you ever experienced resentment or hostility from colleagues because you are a woman in a leadership position?
Yeah, great question. Not overtly, I would say, not overtly, but I have absolutely been in settings where whether or not I've been alongside another man in the meeting, where I felt that the conversation was more directed to him than it was to me. And actually, when I see that happening, I'm quite curious about it. It speaks to a lot around culture, and it also picks up some of, it's kind of slightly connected, I think, to what Asha was saying around kind of sometimes the culture and deference that are given to people. So I think that happens on many levels, and it's not just gender. It happens on, it's a sort of a more intersectional level. But yeah, most certainly. And I have heard also of, you know, certain scenarios where women have even been excluded from key decision-making forums. So yeah, I do think this is something that still happens in part of the workplace, but it's much more beneath the iceberg rather than on the surface.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. And you can see in the chat, more and more women are coming up with agreeing with what you're saying.
It's kind of just little things, you know.
Yeah.
If you join a meeting as a woman and say you arrive on a Teams meeting or you arrive in a room and you're the only woman there, and the conversations about football. Now, I like a lot of sport, but I don't watch a lot of football. So you suddenly feel a little bit excluded from that conversation. And, you know, it's kind of happening. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's those sorts of things around, actually, are our environments inclusive and welcoming for all? So and it, you know, it could be the same if, you know, and at the end of the day, we are there are more women in the workplace, and, you know, if there was a conversation going on that a man didn't feel they could penetrate. Now, again, that's a very gendered view of things, but sometimes these things do still happen in meetings. And again, I have also, you know, heard scenarios where very senior women have pitched up for a meeting and been asked to make the cup of tea, and a view that they're in there to make the tea, not to participate in the meeting. So it's these sorts of biases and assumptions that live in the construct of society, I think, that we still have to tackle sometimes, even in the workplace.
Thank you, Sam. We can hear you quite well. I think your screen could have frozen, but we can hear you. We've got 3 more people wanting to ask some questions, and I'm conscious of time. So can we go straight to Gemma, first of all, please?
Hi, sorry, I couldn't take myself off mute. Hi, thanks for today, Sam. It's been really interesting. I'm one of the deputy chairs of the Women's Network here at LPT, and I've taken lots of notes of things for us to discuss at one of our next meetings. And I was just interested as to what you think would be the top priorities that organisational women's network should be discussing at the moment. Hopefully we are covering them, but I'd be interested in your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably go with the priorities on our network. I mean, first of all, I think they should be discussing the things that matter most to them in their organisation. I think women's health, absolutely key, the health of the workplace, safe working practices as well. So sexual safety in the workplace, and actually how we are supporting our workplaces to have really good speak up cultures and listening up cultures, key. But I think things that help advance women in the workplace, so those flexible working policies, on the theme of health, there's a lot of focus going on around menopause and menopause policies in the workplace as well. But any network should really take their sort of priority focus on what matters most to them in the workplace. So, and that starts with conversations and listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we're running out of time, Sam. Honestly, I wish we had longer. I wish the session was way longer than an hour. But unfortunately, we can't take any more questions at this stage. But Sam, it's been an inspiring session, hearing you talk and hearing you respond really effectively with the audience. Thank you.
Diana, could I ask one question of everybody? And if you could all maybe, those of you who've got time, stick it in the chat. What's the one thing you're going to take from the conversation today? And what's the one thing you're going to do? And that could be something for yourself. It could be something for somebody else. Could be, then this could be 2 bullet points. And I think while people are doing that, Diana, do close the session.
That's brilliant. And one of those, the questions that you've just asked them to put in the chat, we've also included in our feedback. So the feedback from today's session, you can hold your phone up to the QR code on screen now. That will take you straight to 6 key questions that we'd like you to respond to from today's session. Or alternatively, Mohammed's going to put the link in the chat. Feedback is a gift, and we would like you to gift us with what you thought about today's session. I can see people are responding in the chat, and I can't but honestly agree with everything that they're saying. It's been a fantastic session today. What I'd like to do now is hand you back to our chairperson to close the session.
Thanks, Diana, and I couldn't agree more. It's been a fantastic session. I knew it would be, of course, but once again, thank you so much, Sam, for joining us today and giving us your time. You can see from the chat that it's been totally inspiring, and that is fantastic. That's exactly what we needed. I can also say thank you to Diana and Mohammed as well for organising this session, and to thank everybody for coming to it as well. I think Sam has made it very clear to us there's a lot of evidence out there. It's very compelling. We've all got roles and responsibilities in it. Every action can make a difference, so nobody should feel that they can't. You can. And I think we've also got responsibility to support each and every one of us, and to make sure that we understand if something's going on in our own heads, that we seek somebody else out to help, because that positive affirmation, that support, can make a difference. I know it certainly does to me, and I will continue to use that. So thank you, everybody. It really has been a fabulous session, and I know that because it's recorded, it will be a session that can be used by others as well. So once again, thanks, Sam, and thanks to everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.